on the right to make a mistake. And I think the risks of making a mistake continue to increase. I think we have got to try and make sure that the risks of making a mistake are minimised. The .tm story, yes, I know the person who runs .tm. He tells me that it's under contract from one of the ministries in Turkmenistan. I have no way of judging that whatsoever. And I would actually make the point that the IANA functions operator doesn't have the ability to judge who is the authority that they should listen to in Turkmenistan or in any of the other 190-something countries in the globe. And when you then get to delegations and redelegations, which tend to be very, very bitter, you know, I start really understanding, going back to the question we just heard, why the US government would like to back away from something that it can take lots of blame for, and it can probably have no influence on, because yes, go back to Cold War thinking, yes, we could take people's domain names down, we could disrupt foreign powers, governmental communication networks. Yes, you could, but you've actually probably disrupted your own in the process. So, lovely symbol, but actually, yeah, thank you, but no thanks.
Joseph?
Yeah. I really want to react to the X-Files comments. Make it very, very clear that if I look like an alien from the X-Files, it's not my choice. I would love to still have hair. With both of us. Yeah.
We're ready.
No, I think on the US government role, you know, there can be all sorts of considerations. I think Martin makes a good point. I think what's interesting to look at is, you know, from an institutional perspective, and then a US government or US way of thinking, they like things to be run without too much government influence generally. They don't like big government. That's the way to think about it. So, an innocent way of looking at it, which is what the white paper in '97 said, is we'll set up this structure and we'll keep an eye on it, we'll keep a backstop on it to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But once it's mature enough, this whole new structure, then we'll back out, we'll leave, we'll let it be run by the actors of the internet. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I think by now, this structure has been run for over 15 years. We've had a domain system that has enabled, you know, when ICANN was created in 1998, we had 150 million users. Now we have close to 3 billion users. With the Internet of Things, depending on which predictions you hear, we could have 50 billion devices connected to the Internet. That might be a high figure, but never mind. What that means is over just 15 years, we've had this tremendous growth. And to enable that growth, you need a system, an underlying architecture that is very scalable and that is very robust. You need to add many numbers very quickly, there are many internet addresses. You need to have enough space, if you will, for domain names that you can grow that much. And you need the whole system to be coordinated at global level so that you don't have fragmentation and you can find this whichever other computer you want that's connected to the internet anywhere else in the world. That's actually remarkable. Just in 15 years to have basically been able to bring this to almost half of the population of the world. It's pretty amazing. So I think we have a system that's matured well enough. So if you look at it from a structural perspective or an institutional perspective, it's working well. Why should there be, there's basically no need for a government to keep an eye on it. Let the community run it. That's one way to look at it, and there's other aspects.
Let me disagree. Conspiracy-minded as I am.
No, you have a lot of thumbs up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, still, remember 1998, some of you may remember that. That was a great time for the United States. No, let's say, no match for them in terms of that superpower status. And yes, obviously, Clinton's administration the best and the brightest. I know them very well, some of them in person. They were really visionaries in many senses. And yes, for them it was quite obvious that the government should step back and let some private company to run, the internet, to govern the internet. Let's put it in such a way. So that's probably why I can. But at the same time, again, just a reminder, that idea popped up exactly in 2 days after John Costell tried to privatize IANA. And I would imagine why, because John Costell was one of those hippie guys who did believe in public good. And I think that this is my speculation, he's got absolutely infuriated when he realized that IANA, his baby, was actually commercialized. And the contract was between a commercial company and the United States government. That's probably what was underpinning his move. I mean, again, I'm speculating. Now, coming to our days. So what we see now, we see Obama administration, the Obama administration ready to give IANA away, right? And you, Jean-Jacques, suggest that this is a pretty pro-private sector-led exercise. But judging the Obama administration, I must say that this is the most socialist government in the over the last 100 years, let alone Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I wouldn't believe in Obama's move towards a free market and the private sector, because his experience, his record was absolutely opposite. At the same time, we have Republicans who are hardcore marketeers, they are pretty much pro-market, and they insist that IANA should stay on as a national asset with and for the United States, because they don't believe in goodwill of certain governments, and here I would agree with the Republicans certainly, but at the same time we do understand that the pendulum was going from that free market and less government towards less free market and more government, which I hate, but this is the reality. So again, the question is, conspiracy-minded, remember, might it be a smokescreen move to sort of camouflage a certain thing which is going on behind the scene, which is that VeriSign contract with the United States government. VeriSign makes all these changes into the root zone file. IANA simply notarized this process. So let's give away IANA, let's make this scapegoat so that to keep everyone's happy, but at the same time still keep our iron fist and grasp onto the internet.
Since I'm anyhow passing, we don't do any that direction. Before you take the floor, just a quick comment, because I know you guys can go on with these discussions, which are great, but we have another 2 blocks. We've been looking at the US position thus far from the view of what their power can be. Now let's look from their accountability position. So thus far, the US was also a control mechanism that everything works fine, that the procedures have been respected. Now what happens now? If there is no US from September on, there is no one actually who is above ICANN and IANA and who can say, guys, you're not doing a good job. Now, do we really have, you said there is a right level of maturity already. How does it look? What is the mechanism that exists if the US goes away that we can be confident with? I will start with Jean-Jacques and then moving to... I mean, assure us that we can be confident.
Oh. Very quickly, John Costell was part of the team that worked. So John Costell was part of the team that worked on the white paper, etc. So I think it might not be all that. And I'm French. I can come up with lots of anti-American conspiracies. I don't think it's as black and white. And the maturation process that I mentioned is, I think, only one angle. There's many other considerations, including political considerations of all sorts. As for how politicians feel and the fact that they have sometimes very conflicting ideologies and decisions, that's absolutely, so that's, we can come back on that. On accountability, I think in the process, of transitioning. So it was announced in March 2014. We started a consultation process at the end of March, and very quickly we had a lot of people in the community, globally, anywhere in the world, that started saying, hold on, exactly what you've just said, Rana. If the US government goes, I mean, we might think it's not right to have a government to the top of the pile, but at the same time, having the US government in charge just ensured us that if something went wrong, they could say, hold on, stop it there. So there was a parallel process that was created that we called Enhancing ICANN Accountability and Governance. And it's basically designed to make sure that whatever mechanism will be created to replace the US government's supervision will have enough power to indeed stop any bad behavior. And that ICANN as an organization has all the relevant structures and mechanisms so that that can happen. So what is, well, there's a specific working group that's looking at it now. It's working really hard at this very moment. They're looking at what we already have in the structure and seeing whether it's sufficient. And in particular, whether it's sufficient to avoid this notion of capture. So how can we make sure that no particular interest group, whether they are governments or businesses or groups of businesses or others, can basically over-influence the process in the wrong direction? And how can we have a mechanism that will enable the global community to say, stop, this is wrong, and that we have all the right mechanisms to stop it? So that's going on now, and the hope is that this track on accountability will conclude at the same time that the working group on the transition concludes, so we have all the right mechanisms not in place, but in mind in about 6 months' time, which is the target date for completion in September. So in September we hope to have very clear plans on the whole transition and how to make sure we have the right accountability mechanisms in place to have the right checks and balances, as we call it in English. I don't know how you translate it. So.
Now, Martin, we actually do have a very complex system underneath ICANN. A lot of committees, with government advisory committee, with non-commercial constituencies, with commercial ones. There is a system which exists for years. Is that something that we can, that's reliable? Is that something that promises us that this is not going to go wrong? Is that something that helps us see that the thing can be actually done in the right way till September? I think that's another question, huh?
Yeah, if I knew that, I could go down to the local bookmakers and put a lot of money on that and be able to fund my retirement. The system, as you say, yes, is very complex, and people refer to it as multi-stakeholder, but because each stakeholder group sits in their own little room, I must admit, I always think of it very much more as multi-silo. Which in its own right, I think, does actually help, because let's go back to what does the IANA function do? And the IANA function is one of those things in a chain that when it comes down to the .uk registry or the .rs registry or the .sur registry, that we have to deliver to our customers. And Len is not the only one who can do history. When I first started in the domain name space, the bitterness between CCTLDs and ICANN in 2003 was massive. And it was all because ICANN came along and tried to impose its model on all of the registries. And there are countries around the world, including the UK, where we turned around and said, no, we don't want to sign a contract with ICANN. Now, we've come a long, long way since then, and therefore I would sort of go back and say, you know, of the 4 principles that Jean-Jacques put up earlier, number 3 is meets the needs and expectations of the global customers and partners of the IANA services. And this is what the whole of that ICANN, the whole of the domain name system does. It does a devolution down And it's that devolution to, in European Union terms, subsidiarity, bring it down as close as you can to make the decisions at the customer level in business practice, at the local stakeholder level, at a more political description. And that, for me, is where it becomes really important. And that's why an event like this is so important, because I would hope that RNIDS goes away from this with a better understanding of what the Serbian community want and expect and needs, and that will then empower the Serbian registry's voice when it stands up in ICANN and says, we need to achieve something. And that, from a CCTLD point of view, is very, very much more important than, and the number of times we will disagree with the GTLDs, who don't understand.
Acronyms.
Sorry, the generic top-level domains. I get the first negative point. The .coms of this world, where they don't understand this responsibility to a national, to a local community, which is so fundamental to our lives and so important to the vibrancy of our local community. Thanks.
So Leonie, if I understood correctly, what we can hope for is that thus far maybe the US had a chance to remove a country or a domain. Now we are not talking only about countries. We're now talking about, what do you say, 700-800 new top-level domains currently, and probably over 1,500 in the near future, right? So theoretically, the US could have had the chance to do it before. Now it might end up on all of us, if this model succeeds, that we can decide if we want to remove or not a domain. Is it really likely?
I like this word, we. Jean-Jacques used that, and Martin used that, and now Vlada is using this. We who? Those people in the room, do we represent us, the global, or a part of the global community, let's say the Serbian community? Are you sure about this? Let me tell you very briefly a story. Fadi Shehani, the president of ICANN, was doing a multi-stakeholder session on IANA transition and invited to the podium representatives of us, stakeholders. One from business, one from civil society, one from national domains, one from commercial domains, and they were all on the stage, like 4 of them. And then all of a sudden, a very nice man, a Frenchman, obviously, a member of the ICANN board stood up. He was sitting democratically in the audience, and he said, wait a second, this panel, multi-stakeholder panel, is not legitimate. And Fadi was, of course, a little bit embarrassed. How come? Yes, that man said, we don't have a representative of, from the internet users. And then I literally applauded Fadi because he made it, he found that way out. He said, but why shall we need a representative of the internet users community? We're all internet users in this room. See, again, things on the internet and in the internet governance area are a little bit kind of different from different perspectives. So when we mean us and we should be absolutely clear on this. We are not representing the whole bunch of people who use the internet, whether businesses or civil society or whatever. So somehow, I'm sorry, I will be very quick, that was that institutional aspect. I love institutional economics. So in the institutional economics, there is a term which is public good. The good is available for everyone, for the benefit of everyone, for free or for a miserable payment, like public TV, BBC in the United Kingdom. It's public good. It's available to everyone. So you would agree that the internet, theoretically, is a public good, because it must be made available to everyone. But what about the process of governing the internet? Who can govern the internet? Who are those we? Let's start with some very simple thing. To govern the internet, you got to know English, because without English, you cannot just go ahead and catch up with whatever literature and discussions, because everything is in English. Number two, I'll be very quick. Number two, you got to be educated enough to understand all these technical peculiarities and even acronyms. Number three, you got to have funding to travel around intensively, so that to network, I mean, it's a paradox. We all live in the internet. It's our home, it's our business, it's what we win our daily bread with, and yet we got to travel intensively. Who could afford such travels to every part of the world? Very few of us. So even with these three factors, we should understand that this is what in the institutional economics called club good, which is a good available to a very, very narrow stratum, to those very few, chosen. And those we in the audience, whether at the ICANN meeting or at the IGF, they decide for the others. So my question is, how legitimate are we to decide for everyone?
I'm sure that the US government is also internet users. They are also part
Well, they are, and then they're better off than many other nations.
Okay, over to you, Jean-Jacques, with a few observations on the key words that I picked up from there. With this transition, we actually want to move towards showing internet as a public good, closer to the people, closer to the communities. And there are three words that I picked up. Representativeness, how can we really make sure the representativeness is there? Responsibilities if something goes wrong. And inclusiveness, how do we really make sure that we have inclusive people? Maybe these three words can be a message to the ICANN process further. Over to you.
So I'll pick up on the first one, because they're related, so participation and inclusiveness. Actually, thanks, Leonid, because it's a great pitch. Because my long-term goal for my particular role, the way that I'm going to make sure I stay in the job, is actually to increase the participation of European stakeholders in ICANN. This is how I'm going to be judged. At the end of this year, if there's more European stakeholders, my boss will be happy with me. And that means you guys. And I have to be very, very clear. ICANN is not only open to anyone to participate, but it actively encourages more and more participation. So what I do around Europe, which is the region I deal with, I'm very happy to do it in Serbia. I hope that I'll get this opportunity to come back and do that, is go to the countries, go to communities like this audience, and explain, a bit like I've done at the beginning, what is ICANN, what we do, and then I go into why it's relevant to you, depending on whether you're just an end user, or you're part of civil society, or your business, etc., and why you should participate, and how you can participate. This is something that's very real, because we know that the internet is increasingly global, and because of the historic way in which it's developed, it has been very much initially dominated by Western users, and people got involved from the beginning that were from the West. It's just a reality of how we develop. Now that we're becoming more global, we want to make sure that we have a governance system which is representative of all the internet users around the world, and that includes bringing everyone into the discussions. So I'd love to come back and do that in more detail with you. I should just mention also, not only is it open, but we have actually travel funding available for, for some people.
50 people.
It's more than that. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
We try and do that. We have more languages than the UN. I have one more, anyway. We have transcripts available. We have remote participation. So if it's streamed on audio and video, you can go to the website and check it out. You can completely participate remotely. I would actually challenge you to find a single international organization around the world that is as open as we are, and that tries to help participation in so many different languages and from so many nations. Seriously, I would challenge you to find them. because there's not that many I know of, and believe me, I've taken part in previous roles in other discussions, and yes, all the problems that Leonid has mentioned exist. Yes, it's easier if you speak one of the key languages, such as Russian, English, or French. Well, depending on some negotiations, it's good to have Russian. I'm not good enough. So, you know, it's a particular setup. We try and always improve, but I hope that I can take that up maybe with Leda and our RNIDS and come back here to Belgrade to inform you about how you can take part, because we really would want to welcome more participation. There's a few of you in the room that have done that, in a few fellows, etc. But yeah, it's very open, and please do participate. Really.
One of the thumbs up definitely for the process in ICANN, besides the committees, the whole structure, is actually the participation of people, including the openness, the transparency. And I think I have the impression that other processes, including ITU, have actually followed the level of transparency and participation within the ICANN processes and into the governance forum. So that's a great achievement. Now, Martin, a quick comment before we throw the last few comments from the audience and wrap up the session. Quick comment from your side, if you wish. I mean, including, we discussed a good example of the UK involvement with stakeholders. So how can all these 300 people actually get involved in this?
Yes, it's, I think, one of those many cases of one size is not going to fit all. So, for example, Nominet in the UK tries to stimulate a UK Internet Governance Forum. We're lucky to get 100 people into a room. Yeah, gives you some idea of, well, actually, yes, you've got a rich scene here. It might not be representative, but your networks all then allow you to get that bigger engagement in the process. And at the end of the day, I think the important thing is to help people understand the issues, help people get engaged, and make sure that the local voice is heard. Now, that is actually, and the particular point that I was referring to, is engagement with intergovernmental organisations. Because trying to get involved in the ITU, and Nominet is one of the very few top-level domains that is a member of the ITU, is very, very difficult for all the reasons that Leonid has just outlined as being issues for ICANN. We were actually very lucky that the UK government, and both Jean-Jacques and I used to work for the UK government, has over the years cut and cut and cut. And now the UK government finds it actually very difficult to be able to be involved in all the fora that the International Telecommunications Union, the intergovernmental organisation, has. So what has it done? It's opened up, it has a multi-stakeholder approach, and stakeholders in the UK can get involved in that process. And so, for example, at the ITU's Plenipotentiary Conference, at the World Conference on International Telecommunications, Nominet, me, had the pleasure, I think this might be the right word, of being part of the conference as part of the UK delegation. So you can see that you've got different ways of trying to make sure that the right voice is being heard, that people are making sure that the bottom-up model is very, very important, very, very important.
And I would add on that even in Serbia, we have a number of people which are involved in all these processes. On their own affiliations, with RNIDS, with the ministries, with NGOs. So we do have actually a community which is working quite close and having an impact. You can witness that. So we should probably get together more. Two final comments from the audience, if there are so. Don't be shy. Okay, one over there. Where's the mic? Thanks. Anyone else? Introduce yourself, please. Thank you. Keep it quick.
Dobar dan, ja sam Dušan. Moje pitanje je na srpskom. Pitanje je od koga je Google kupio app domen i na koji način je kupio i za koji pas. Hvala.
Hvala. Još neko pitanje? Komentar? Ok. We're gonna... there's another question? Aha, ok. Ajde tamo, evo mikrofon. Samo kratko, pošto ste već bili, i tamo je bio još jedan pozadini čini mi se, pa ćemo i njega kratko.
Just a short question. Who does the security as an icon? Who does the security of the files as icon?
Hvala. I tamo posljednje pitanje vidim da nas je bilo. Samo se predstavite.
Hello, my name is Miroslav Ostić. Question. We talked about the internet, and the internet that we spoke about is about 2%. What happens with the deep net?